With the NBA trade deadline just days away, we're joined by insider Matt Moore to talk about Miami's up and down season and what, if anything, we might expect from the Heat over the next few days. Is a deal on the horizon to help Jimmy Butler in his quest for a title? Find out in today's great episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com. Joining me as always, it's longtime NBA reporter David Ramil. However you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your best bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. So excited to be joined by Matt Moore, NBA insider at the Action Network, our Locked On Podcast Network colleague. He does the NBA shows on Monday night with my other colleague here, David. We're going to be talking about some of the biggest NBA trade deadline storylines and if the Heat can be a factor in any of these moves. But let's start, Matt, by following up on something that already happened. What happens next with Kyle Lowry? Because we've heard reports that he could end up in Orlando or Philadelphia, especially if he gets bought out by the Hornets. The Magic might be interested in trading for him, according to Mark Stein. I'm curious to know what you're hearing on this.
Yeah, so I reported over the weekend. It's always good when I report something and then Stein reports something similar, because that way I don't have to be terrified. The Hall of Famer Mark Stein. The situation with Lowry is kind of this. My understanding is that he is, at least right now, posturing that he is reluctant to agree to a buyout. And what I mean by that is that he's reluctant to agree to taking less money for a buyout, right? That's one of the reasons that these teams do it, is like they take on the contract and then they're like, hey, we'll let you go wherever you've got most of your money for the year. We'll give you a chunk of the money for the rest of the year. You take a little bit of a discount, and then you can go join another team and compete for a title. But it sounds like, from what I've heard, that Kyle Lowry is at least, and on some level, resistant to giving up any money in such an arrangement, which means that limits his options, the Hornets' options, greatly, right? And so they want to move him. As such, they want to try and get a deal done. And since most of these teams are not going to be giving up significant assets for Lowry at this point in his career, for anything that the Hornets would want to take on, then that leaves just really a handful, maybe, of teams. But the biggest one is the Orlando Magic. My understanding is that the Magic are the most interested of the teams. Now, they also have interest in Chris Paul. They've had conversations with the Warriors about Chris Paul involving a package involving multiple players. So they are the team, and the Magic have been, this also tracks. One of the things I try and do is I want to make sure that when I hear stuff, that it lines up with stuff I've heard consistently. And the Magic, I've heard last year, they were in on Fred VanVleet. They were trying to get that deal done. They chased point guards this summer. So they're trying to bring up a lot of different things to try and address this point guard situation. So they make a lot of sense as a Kyle Lowry landing spot. They have the contracts that they would move. I think from there, it kind of depends on how much the Hornets are going to try and squeeze from the Magic. If he's bought out, if the Hornets just decide, just pay him out the remainder, it's fine. Let him go. Or if he changes his mind and agrees to a lower number, Philadelphia and the Lakers are the two teams I expect to be at the top of his list. But I do think there's a strong possibility he winds up in Orlando by Thursday.
Is it a matter of improving the point guard situation, or are they just looking for veteran leadership in their locker room? Because obviously that's a pretty young team. I just can't see exactly why Lowry would be a fit on that kind of, he doesn't provide 3-point shooting at this point. He doesn't really provide, much of anything, which is why Miami traded him. So why the fit in Orlando? Why the pursuit there?
The bar is very low for point guard there, dude. It's, They don't need. Kyle is still probably an upgrade on what they've had there. But if you want like the real dynamic here, there's one of two angles here, and I'm not sure which one it is. Like, I'm not aware of which of these two situations it is. But they like a lot of teams are trying to move a player that is coming up for an extension that maybe they don't want to give big money to. Markelle Fultz is going to be up for a new deal. They didn't come to an agreement on the extension with him, so you try and move him so you're not on the hook. Because if you don't move him, then you're the one that has to pay that money. And now you've got this contract because you can't lose him for nothing. So now you're in the situation where you're trying to take this player in that situation and turn him into a plus asset And I think that's where this dynamic kind of gets in there. The other kind of, I have seen teams do this too, where they add the veteran and that takes some of the leverage away from conversations with Fultz so they can get a number that they prefer, right? Where it's like, look, we've got Kyle Lowry and Kyle says he wants to stay. Like Kyle's sitting, we're happy to re-sign Kyle and keep him. You try and make that type of maneuver to try and keep him. Now, I don't know if Kyle stays, but that to me seems like part of this dynamic there. It all kind of revolves around. It's less about Lowry as an upgrade over Markelle Fultz and more about the Magic trying to manage how much to pay into that market. And if nothing else, a trade would probably mean that they clear the cap space to once again try and add a point guard in free agency.
And one thing that, I mean, the numbers add up pretty quick. You just have to play with the trade machine for 10 seconds with the Magic, and it's Markelle Fultz and Gary Harris as expirings going to Charlotte, and that gets it there. Now, I don't know what else would have to be included, or if those are the players that they're talking about, who knows? But they definitely have some chunky salaries that they could use to get up to a Kyle Lowry number. You also just talk to coaches and kind of, I don't know, I don't claim to know Jamal Mosley at all, but he's obviously trying to build a culture there in Orlando, and the Heat players loved Kyle Lowry, especially the young guys. Jaime Jaquez Jr., I mean, that was one of his vets was Kyle Lowry, in addition to Kevin Love. Jimmy obviously loves Kyle Lowry. So you could put him with a guy like Jalen Suggs. Like, I don't know many point guards who would be a better mentor to somebody like Jalen Suggs than Kyle Lowry, right? And so Anthony Black, who they just drafted, who I kind of like. I think people just are kind of low on him, but whatever. I think it makes sense for them too, just from a culture standpoint. David, question for you.
Uh-oh.
Hypothetically, it's Philadelphia and Orlando. Let's get rid of all the nerdy, like how it could actually happen kind of stuff. Sure. Which one would suck more for Heat fans?
I think.
Can I throw a third one in there?
Sure.
The Knicks. Let's throw the Knicks in there because it feels like Lowry would be like a Tibbs guy too. So let's throw those three teams in there.
Knicks for sure. Okay. Although I think you wouldn't really have much of a factor. You wouldn't be much of a factor there. The Sixers, just because of the Joel Embiid thing, I think the Heat and their fan base probably wouldn't take them as seriously as a threat or anything like that, so they wouldn't be all that concerned. And you can kind of justify it to yourself as saying, you know what, he's just going back home. He's from Philadelphia, etc. The Orlando Magic, like, it always interests me to hear Magic fans thinking of Miami as a rival when it's kind of like the Don Draper meme, like, we don't think about you at all. So I don't think the Heat fans are all that concerned about anything the Magic do.
Magic fans are like, we always out rebound you, and you're like, cool. We out championship you. That's great. Congrats. All right. Anything else on the Kyle Lowry front, David? Before we move on?
No, not really.
No. All right. Let's move on then. Let's move on to a player that's on the roster, Caleb Martin. It's such an interesting thing with Caleb, just to catch the listeners up here. He basically is on an expiring contract. He has a $7.1 million player option for next year. All indications are that he's going to opt out of that and seek a longer-term, more lucrative contract, which he most certainly deserves at this point, currently averaging a career-high 10.1 points per game or something like that right now. And he's a good player. He's also a very important player to Miami, so you can't just trade him for nothing. I wrote that over the weekend. Barry Jackson wrote it this morning for the Miami Herald. It's like, yes, they're scanning the market for Caleb Martin opportunities, but they're not going to just trade him just because they're afraid of him, quote unquote, walking away for nothing. He's still really important for this championship push that they're trying to make. Matt, what are you hearing on Caleb Martin?
Yeah, all I've heard is that they're going to try and find a location, like they'll explore the market for him. And the key here is, and I got banged up a little bit on a report a couple weeks ago with the Pelicans, where it's important to establish the distinction between shopping and exploring the market. And the distinction there is that if you're shopping a guy, you're actively like, I would like for this player to not be on my roster by the end of the year, whether it's for contract or positional. Like, there's a lot of reasons for that, but you are actively like, my preference would be otherwise. Exploring the market is like, let's take a look and see what the options are here, because the money is going to be significant. I would say that there is a sense from other teams that have talked to Miami that shedding salary seems to be a larger priority than maybe they originally thought, that maybe that this team is looking to trim up things pretty significantly. The one team that I do think that you need to keep an eye on is probably Phoenix, because Phoenix is still looking to, like, they are not done, and they are still looking for not only big upgrades, but small upgrades. And they had a lot of interest in him this summer when the Heat were trying to get the Damian Lillard deal done.
Yes.
That was a conversation that they really liked. They really like Caleb Martin in Phoenix.
It felt like if it wasn't Milwaukee, and if it wasn't Grayson Allen, and if it was Miami, it would have been Caleb Martin probably in that Grayson Allen spot, kind of in that whole three-way structure with DeAndre Ayton going to Portland and et cetera.
Yeah, so that's like where I would probably start with those considerations. The other team I'd probably look at is Utah, just because those teams I know those teams have talked quite a bit over the last year. They've had a lot of conversations, and I know that the Heat have interest in Kelly Olynyk, and I know that the Jazz, at least at one point, had interest in Caleb Martin. So that's another team I would probably look at as far as there's a capacity for some framework to get done there. But as of now, I haven't heard any sort of like, this team is working on a Caleb Martin deal. It seems pretty early in that process, though that could have changed in the last 24 hours.
Well, let's keep talking about Caleb Martin and what East rival is the East rival for the Heat to watch the most before the trade deadline on Thursday. We'll do that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And if you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. Matt, how are you feeling about your Kansas City Chiefs in the upcoming Super Bowl?
I feel really good. We have the better coach. We have the better quarterback. We have the better defense. So not really sure why we're underdogs.
Are you allowed to say that you feel good about your football team and it not backfire in your face? I didn't even know that was a thing.
It probably will.
You just tempt the football
The
gods.
last time I felt this good was in 2021 when they got absolutely destroyed by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So
the answer is no.
That's how it's going.
Okay, very good. I just wasn't sure if that was just Miami things or if that existed for other fans and others.
An old Dolphins PTSD for you. But anyway, if you're looking to overcome that, FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season in a W or 2 or maybe even 3. Not only can you bet on who will win the Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which player will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. You'll find it all over at FanDuel. New customers can join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. Everydayers will be back on Tuesday night with our recap of the Orlando Magic game, which could eventually be Kyle Lowry's team. We'll see.
Big game. Big game for tiebreaker.
Big game for the tiebreaker. Big game to get out of this losing stretch. 8 of the last 10. You can't lose to your in-state rival, the Orlando Magic, at home. That'll give Magic fans something to talk about. We don't want that. I have no problem with the Magic. I really don't. I guess that's the whole point. Anyway, Caleb Martin. So here's the thing about Caleb Martin. Those names that Matt mentioned were really interesting, especially the Kelly Olynyk thing. It's very easy to kind of picture how Kelly Olynyk would fit in to Miami, A, because he already did it once, and B, it's kind of just like a souped-up Kevin Love who can sort of play next to Bam Adebayo or behind Bam Adebayo, or you could play him and Kevin Love together and just kind of get crazy and just see what happens. Who knows?
Didn't we do this already? Like, I mean, Miami fans are now looking at
it was Kelly Olynyk and Josh McRoberts.
Yeah, like we did. But I mean, we had that Olynyk experience already. And I mean, I'm a Kelly fan. I didn't want him traded in the first place, but I remember people talking about him being a basically a trash basket, and saying he was a worthless player. He can't do anything, can't rebound. Like, who gets to be 7 feet?
Well, the Heat are in need of a new scapegoat ever since they traded Kyle Lowry. You got to take some of the pressure off of Tyler Herro.
That makes sent. Well, I don't know about that. I think Tyler's built for this. That's
he is.
That's his whole.
Get
Matt started talking about Tyler because he's a huge Hero fan, almost as big as you are.
Is that sarcastic?
No, that's dark. That's
yeah,
what I thought. I was very confused.
I'm very big on they are under 500 when he plays trend. I actually, for me, it's like with the whole thing with Tyler for me is about, does it work? It's like not about how he plays,
right?
Because that's the thing, is like you look at how he plays and you're like, Tyler Herro's a good player, and then you look at like how the Heat do when he plays, and you're like, I don't know. That's like, it's more that he is not the most effective tactic available. That's what I would say.
That's fine. You could tell me about your stats about like, fancy advanced analytics, like winning percentage and things like that. He's a hooper, Matt. That's it. He's a hooper.
He's got fashion sense.
He's a hooper. He wears like weird Pokemon bunny ears or whatever that was after the game the other night. I'm here for it. The NBA is an entertainment product. Let's not forget it. He is nothing but entertaining. Anyway, The other part I got Caleb Martin. And the thing, like I keep playing with like Caleb Martin trades because I think there needs to have to be the player that the Heat are getting back has to be at least, I would guess, 80% as helpful as Caleb Martin. And if that player is under contract, a team-controlled, team-friendly contract for at least another year through next season, then you at least have to have a meeting about it if you're Miami. And that's not like the Kelly Olynyks are. You could argue that that's an upgrade, right? Depending on a positional need and kind of rebalancing the roster. I'm just talking about like second draft kind of guys. Like one name I keep bringing up, and I have no reporting on this. I'm not indicating that this is a real thing, but it's just a name that makes sense to me, is like Davion Mitchell in Sacramento. Like Sacramento could use somebody like Caleb Martin. If they're out on Davion Mitchell, would they just trade Davion Mitchell in the 2 years remaining on his contract to Miami? Miami can get this guy for $5 million. He's not as good as Caleb Martin right now, but could he be helpful by this time next season? Could he be the next developmental project for Miami? I'm not saying that the Heat would do it. I'm just saying, like, if it was Davion Mitchell and like a second round pick coming back, you'd at least have to think about it. I don't know that Sacramento would do it, but these are kind of the frameworks that I'm thinking about. David, would that be worth? Oh, go ahead, Matt. Yeah, please.
I would just say, like, I haven't heard anything about those types of discussions, but I will say this, like, that tracks with a lot of what I've heard from Sacramento, which is like they want a small forward upgrade. Like they've been after. They were after OG Anunoby. They missed out. They were after Pascal Siakam. They missed out. They have had interest in Tobias Harris. They've had interest in who else? There was another small forward I know that they've lodged interest in. Like that's where they're looking to upgrade things. So Caleb seems like a really good fit there. It might honestly be a pretty good situation too, given that Sacramento is probably in a position to be like, okay, we tried making these big swings and haven't been able to get it done. We can do this deal and not give up as much. I think one of the problems you're going to run into is like in any sort of those conversations, you are going to have to take on Harrison Barnes, or you're going to have to find a third team to take him on. So if they're giving up Davion as a young player, they're going to want Caleb back, but they're also going to want to send out contracts that open up their ability to upgrade further. So you can work out a three-teamer, but that's going to have to be part of, I think, the consideration unless you want to take back Barnes.
Caleb Martin also makes sense for Sacramento. I mean, this doesn't actually really matter, but he at least went to school in Reno, which is like a 2-hour drive from Sacramento. So there's that. David, like how should the Heat manage this Caleb Martin thing? Because this is a real decision. This is something that they have to figure out. You know, we dealt with this last year with Max Strus and Gabe Vincent. Ultimately, Miami said, you know what? We're just going to keep these guys. We're going to risk them walking away for nothing. And that ended up being the starting backcourt going into the finals. So it was a good decision to keep those guys around because it helped you make that finals push, even if you did lose them for nothing. And they didn't really, because they still did a sign and trade with Max Strus that got them back a second-round pick. So it wasn't exactly nothing. But that's sort of the same calculus they're dealing with right now with Caleb.
My answer is a little different now than it was, say, a month ago. And I think the biggest reason for that is Jaime Jaquez and the kind of drop-off that he's experienced over the last few weeks with injury and then coming back from injury. He has not been nearly as impactful or productive. And while that might turn around, like Miami's strength this season has been like their depth and in their ability to, you know, play at a high level when occasionally, not consistently. But, you know, Jaime had been so good for Miami, and it seemed like he was going to be such a big part of Miami's postseason, however long that might last. And if that's the case, then the idea is that you could trade Caleb for something that you would desperately need, like another positional need, or even just to clear up cap space, something. He could provide something as an expiring contract. And now with Jaime's kind of drop off, I don't know that you can afford to. And I think Miami being still in the all in it for now situation that they're in, and they want to win now, I think it's probably behooves them to keep Caleb, and you wind up just losing him for nothing. And so be it. Again, if you can replicate somehow magically last postseason success and go on a deep run, and Caleb can be a part of that, I think it's not as bitter a pill to swallow if you have to wind up keeping them and wind up not getting anything back in return.
He's a good player. He's part of their closing lineups right now. They still rely on him for a lot of things. He's got good chemistry with a lot of the core players. Like you just don't move off of that guy because you're afraid of him walking away for nothing. And there is ways, if they clear cap space over the summer, trading one of those bigger contracts where you could still keep Caleb Martin. So it's not completely out of the possibility, although I still think it's a small possibility that that's the case. But let's move on off of Caleb Martin. And I'm just going to throw out some names here, Matt. And if you got something great, if not, you can either tell me you don't want to talk about it, or we could talk about it in some other kind of way. We could do this however you want. You're the guest. Your rules. I'm obsessed with trying to get Dorian Finney-Smith to Miami. I don't think it can happen. I think a lot of fan bases are obsessed with a very similar idea. But there's a couple of guys on Brooklyn who I'm really interested in. It's him. I'm a little interested in Cam Johnson. I know he's had a bit of a down year, but I'd be willing to buy low on him for some upswing upside there. Dennis Smith Jr. is somebody that is on David's favorite player list. And I think he makes some sense for depth purposes for Miami. What do you know about Brooklyn, what they're looking for before the deadline?
I mean, they're open for business, and so I think that they've had talks before, so there's probably something to be worked out there. The only issue is that draft pick equity is good for them, but I don't know that it's going to generate a lot. Like, it won't. A pick isn't going to get you in the Cam Johnson situation. Tyler Herro in a pick is probably going to get you into multiple of their guys conversation. Like, you could reshape the roster pretty significantly if you were to do that kind of deal, because they're one of the teams that I think has a real interest in Tyler Herro. I think them and the Jazz are the two teams that I would look at and be like, I know in the past that at least over the summer, those two teams were the two teams that I knew that were like, no, like they like Tyler Herro. They're not just like willing to take him. They actually are like really, they like the idea of adding Tyler Herro. So if you're willing to shake up the core to that degree, then I think you have the ability to maybe add either DFS or Royce O'Neal. I think you can probably get in the conversation for Cam Johnson. They're in a really tricky place because of what they're trying to move. The other thing is, if you're willing, this is a big one. Some of this also gets into not just what are you willing to give them, but what are you willing to take back? And Spencer Dinwiddie is a guy that they need to move for about every reason in the entire world. Even if that means that you're not taking him back, if you can find a third team that's like, okay, we'll take Spencer Dinwiddie if Miami gives us X. That might be a possibility for you to pull off, because they like the quiet quitting stuff is out there, but like this has been out there for quite a while that Spencer does not want to be there. So I do think that Cam's probably available. I do think that you can probably get in the conversation, but I don't think it's going to be like, oh, we'll send them insert whatever extra piece and then a pick, and we'll get back like one of these guys. They're probably, and especially this is one of the issues I think Miami is going to run into. One of the weird kind of wrinkles with conversations with execs is if you have something, even if you're like, but that's not going to be involved in this trade because he's too good for what we're talking about here. They're still like, no, you have to include him. It gets really weird when you're not including a piece that when they know you're willing to trade him somewhere else, that gets really tricky. So it would be a little bit difficult, but I could also see them being a Caleb Martin landing spot if those kind of deals would make sense. I do think Brooklyn is probably a really easy partner for Miami to deal with for a number of reasons.
David, I have a fake trade involving Tyler Herro to Brooklyn. I'm going to ask you about it next after this on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Look, sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you, so it's important to let that out, especially as someone who's unbiased in your life. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. It's such a convenient way of finding the help that you might be looking for. If you're thinking about trying therapy, then BetterHelp is the option for you. And it's so convenient, and there's so many different options. It's based on your schedule. You can find somebody that you're comfortable with. And if for whatever reason you want to switch therapists, well, BetterHelp can make that a reality. It's so convenient. Again, there's so many different things. And therapy, I think, again, is a big part of people just trying to make a change, or if you just want to just get something off your chest. Like I said, if you want to just talk to somebody, then BetterHelp and therapists from BetterHelp are the option for you. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA, and you get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. Every day, we got games Tuesday night. We got a recap. We got a game Wednesday night. We're going to have a recap. And we got the trade deadline on Thursday afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern time. And we will have our reactions after that as well. Just an awesome week of Locked On Heat episodes. You can't miss any of them, including the rest of this one. We're joined by Matt Moore from the Action Network, our Locked On Podcast Network colleague. But, David, I wanted to throw this trade idea at you because Matt was just talking about this Brooklyn thing, and it got my gears turning.
Yeah.
What do you say if this is the trade? The Brooklyn Nets call. They offer you Cam Johnson and Royce O'Neal for Tyler Herro, Nikola Jovic, and Caleb Martin.
No way. No chance. No chance. I don't see what the benefit is for that. I mean, Royce O'Neal is a fine player, but Cam Johnson, I mean, you've already got a Cam Johnson at home, right? Like, isn't that the idea of Tyler? I mean, like, that's the idea of Tyler here, right?
No, not that Cam.
Also,
not Cam Thomas. Cam Johnson.
Okay. Sorry. I made a mistake there. Yeah. No, I don't either way though. You're right. No, I just don't think I don't think it's worth it. I really don't think it's worth it.
That's
I think
fair.
you're sacrificing a lot of their depth, and I just don't think it moves the needle enough for what Miami's trying to accomplish this season.
Are you sacrificing depth there because you're just basically swapping a shooting guard for a starting shooting guard for a starting power forward? You're still getting a small forward back.
It makes you a little bit more versatile. Like, I think this is the thing isn't Miami really good when you have more options to go to? Like, isn't Miami, like, do you need talent upgrades? Or if you're trying to replicate the success that you've had the last 4 seasons, isn't it more about having a lot of options on the menu?
So you like the deal,
That's what I would say. Yeah.
I kind of do, just from part of this is also for me is that I don't look at Miami the way I look at other places where it's like, if you get worse talent, they're not going to succeed. I think if you get different talent, you're giving the most important figure in Miami, which is Spo, a better opportunity to figure out answers. Like, the regular season right now, we can be honest, just like last year, it's not a bust, but it's like, you're not gonna come out of this with like, what a great regular season. That's not going to happen. So you have to go back to last year and be like, you have to be the team that figures out answers when the playoffs come. And you can do that, but you better have as many options on the menu as possible. Because last year you got by on shooting and then a lot of like great play by various guys who are not here anymore. So I think increasing those kind of options, because otherwise it's going to have to be like, who's going to step up the way that those guys did last year? Tyler Herro is going to score 30 a game. And I'm like, I don't know if that equation works out in a plus minus if you're going to outscore the opponent by enough in those situations. So I personally think it's a pretty good idea.
I've been toying around with it a lot. It's just something that's really interesting to me. Again, I don't know that I would do it. I really don't know that the Heat would do it, because they've basically promised Tyler Herro that they're only moving him for like a top 50 kind of guy in the NBA, right? Or probably not like a top 20 guy in the NBA right now. I don't know, but Matt, I agree with all the points you just made. It's why it's so interesting to me. I know why David doesn't like it, because Dennis Smith Jr. is not in it. Throw Dennis Smith Jr. in there, David. Are you doing it now?
No, I
still no. Wow. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Let's go. Just a couple more things that I want to get to before we leave here. Just Matt, you can take this. This is open ended, but in the Eastern Conference, we got a lot of things going on. We know Milwaukee's looking for bench upgrades. Boston's sort of been in and out of the mix according to the reporting. Whatever, but they're awesome. They're very good. They don't really have to do anything. Philadelphia is a whole other question mark that we talked a little bit about on Monday, and what they do very much depends on the next couple days and what happens with the surgery for Joel Embiid. But of the playoff teams in the East, right? So I really don't care about where Kyle Kuzma's going unless he's going somewhere to a playoff team in the East. But of the playoff teams in the East, what are the teams you're watching? What are some names that we could look at? Again, very open-ended. You can kind of take it wherever you want.
So I know that Milwaukee and Washington have had conversations, and I don't know who that's about. I'm going to bet that it's probably about, it seems like Tyus and DeLon are the two that are getting the most attention. Like, everyone kind of woke up and was like, oh, hey, like DeLon Wright's there. So like, that's a big one. I think when you look at Cleveland is another team that I would actually look at. Like, they're not done. Like, they're still looking for, they still want that one more 3-and-D weapon. They are trying to, they are going the opposite approach. Is like, they're like, if we just get 7 guys that can fill that the 5th guy on the floor, one of them can hit the corner 3, right? And so they're looking for those types of options. I do like Boston, I think, is always going to be opportunistic. Like, they're just a very active front office. They've been that way for a decade plus, and that's not a Brad thing. That's like goes to some of the other guys in that front office who are very smart. I do think that Milwaukee is really just looking like Milwaukee. I know would like to reshape that bench, not just like one move, but multiple. Like, you're going to hear stuff about Bobby Portis over the coming days. You're going to hear stuff about Pat Connaughton over the coming days. So they're going to be looking out for some sort of like significant reshaping of the bench while they feel pretty good about their starters. As I think they should, that they're going to turn a corner here. The Knicks, obviously, like the Knicks are nowhere near done. Like, they're shopping for big moves and small moves and everything in the middle. Like, they're a very active group. If you are repped by CAA, they have called your team and and that means everybody. Go down the roster of, and I mean literally anyone, they have called and been like, hey, so what about? So they're a team that I think is actively looking to get better. We talked about Orlando and what they're looking to do with really focused in on point guards. So like that's a very big key for them. And then obviously you've got Atlanta, who's in a sell spot, but they're not in like a complete sell spot. They're in a reconfigure spot. I'm not expecting anything out of Chicago. I'm not expecting anything more out of Indiana. I'm not expecting anything more out of. I'm trying to think who else who
Cleveland
covered.
Cleveland is aggressive.
I do think Cleveland's going to keep looking for stuff. They're not going to like the Jared Allen stuff. I think is off the table now. He's played so great, and they tried to figure out something with the Pelicans, and they could not figure it out. They just couldn't come to terms on stuff. So that's over. That's been a month. That's a couple months done. So from there, I think you've kind of run through everybody. Now the Sixers are maybe the most interesting one, right?
Yeah.
Because you would kind of assume, like, all right, if Embiid's out, there's no reason for them to do anything. They had this great team. They can just like try and run it back this year. I don't know that that's the way that Morey is wired. I think Morey is more wired, especially if there is a chance that he comes back. If there is a chance Embiid comes back, I think Morey will continue to look all the way up until the deadline to try and get a major move done, specifically with Tobias Harris. I know they've had conversations with Detroit. So they're not, I don't think they're going to stop trying to move things. But after the deadline, like, how do I expect the East to shake out? Boston at the top, Knicks second. Cavs, okay. Bucks third, Cavs fourth. Close though. Those teams are pretty close because Milwaukee's got a lot of stuff to fix there, especially with the bench. And then you got the kind of the rest of that conference, and you will see with Miami. I'm not expecting. I'll say this: I do not expect after the deadline for Miami to suddenly be a top 4 team for me.
All right, you're talking about standings, or you're just talking about like trustability.
Yeah, I think probably for seedings, I think it's still that's what's funny is like Miami is not going to be a top 4 team, but I still think they've probably got with Embiid out, they probably got the 3rd highest championship equity of any team in the Eastern Conference, in my opinion.
Yeah. David, I want to ask you the same thing, but before we do that, back just right on that Philadelphia thing, I know that like I think like the common knowledge, I guess, like the first reaction of if Embiid is out, just stand pat, don't do anything at the deadline if you're Philadelphia. But to Matt's point, if you think that Joel Embiid could be 80% of what he was in the regular season for the playoffs, it almost behooves you to add if there's any chance, because not only does that add to a team that might be able to make a run in the playoffs, but it keeps you lifted. And if you can add like an impact piece, you can continue to win games. Somebody who could pair with Tyrese Maxey while Joel Embiid is out. So if you think that player is good enough to help you do that, I don't know. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule right now with the 76ers, but I wouldn't be shocked at all if they went and made an addition at the deadline.
No, me neither.
So
yeah, no, I agree.
We'll see what happens there.
Yeah, no, I think it always. I mean, if you can add a player that's going to contribute something this year, regardless of how high the ceiling might actually be, depending on Embiid's return or not, you still want to be able to improve your roster and still be able to make positive changes. And look, they've been trying to move Tobias for so long now that, if you can get a player of value, again, who's going to be a contributor, not just this season, during the postseason, and however that shapes out and beyond that, you make that move 100%.
Do you agree with Matt's point about the 3rd highest championship equity being the Miami Heat right now? Like, how do you predict that the East is going to shake out after the trade deadline?
Oh, I don't think it's after the trade deadline in terms of like
just
which
standings,
team is
right? Trustability. You take, Matt was very vague about it. You could be vague too.
If the playoffs started after the trade dedeadline,
I like that framing.
Which team do you think has the most championship equity? And of those teams, where does Miami rank?
I mean, I place them pretty highly. I think, again, there's something to it when every team and every GM and I mean, a couple talking heads say Miami is not the team you'd want to face. It's Eric Spoelstra, it's Jimmy Butler. And I don't know if I feel 100% comfortable in saying that Jimmy is going to be able to come close to what we saw last year when he was historically good. And everybody seems to have forgotten that. But there's the possibility of that. And that makes him as dangerous as anybody in the East. Regular season record be damned. Whatever it is that the Celtics, front office is capable of doing, and their elite starting 5 and everything else, and Derek White all-star, I still trust Miami in being able to knock them off in a series. Does it seem unlikely? Absolutely. But yet it still happens.
The coaching gap is so huge.
Yes.
And I run down in the Eastern Conference and I'm like, which coach do you trust? I trust Spo over Maz. Which coach do you trust? I trust Spo over Doc. Which coach do you trust? I trust Spo over Bickerstaff. Which coach do you trust? I trust Spo over Tibbs. Which coach, like on and on and on and on. So it's like, it really just now winning 3 in a row is really hard when you're not the better team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what made last year such an incredible run. But at the same time, I do think that the playoffs more than ever are about problem solving. And I just think that Spo is the best at it until he runs it against a team like in Denver, where it's like you do not have. I mean, no, I'm not rubbing this in, David. Like
but it was the two best problem solvers in the league at that point.
Right.
You had Nikola Jokic versus Eric Spoelstra, and that's what I said. Jokic was the most dominant force on the western part of the bracket last year in the playoffs, and it's why Denver got to the finals. Eric Spoelstra was the most dominant force in the Eastern Conference side of the bracket last year, and it's why the Heat ended up in the playoffs or in the finals. I'm sorry. So that's how we got there. I love your optimism, David. I love the strong take. I'm not going to throw cold water on it. In fact, we're just going to end the show right there. So that's what we're going to do. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. Make sure to follow Matt Moore. His Twitter handle is right there on YouTube at HP Basketball. And also follow him at the Action Network, Locked On NBA on Monday nights, and Locked On Nuggets as well. Matt, always fun talking with you. We really appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me, guys.